Howdy everybody. I got some sad news yesterday morning. I found out that Paul Davidson, one of my inspirations and mentors, had passed away at 93. He had a huge impact on post-Keynesian economics and was for many years the leading exponent of Keynes's approach, not the Keynesian approach, on this side of the Atlantic. I wanted to take a few minutes today to honor his memory and to educate some of you younger folks that didn't know so much about him. Now, I'm not going to try to do a comprehensive biography or review all of his research. Instead, this is going to be much more personal. This is going to be about what he meant to me. Well, let me catch you up, first of all, on where I was in my life when I first came across his name. I went to college, University of Tennessee, solely because it was closer to my house than my high school. Well, I made an early mistake. I started as a physics major. I was 100% sure that's what I wanted to do. I was planning on earning a PhD in it, spending my whole life in a white lab coat. I remember it well. I was in honors physics my first quarter of college when I discovered how god-awful boring physics was. Turns out what I really wanted was to be an astronaut, and I looked around and they didn't have a major for that. So I quit physics and had no idea where to go next. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, you moron. You love international relations. Well, I've shown you these things a million times. Here's a game on the Soviets invading Western Europe. What we got over here? Sinai on three of the different Arab-Israeli wars. War in the Falklands. That's a good one. Now, it kind of looks like I enjoy international relations when they break down, and that's not entirely true, but there is some truth to it. So that led me to political science, and then I got to thinking about the Foreign Service. And then I decided that a good Foreign Service officer ought to understand economics as well, since that was a key factor so often in the real world. So I added econ. Oh boy, what a decision that was. One class later, History of Economic Thought from Hans Jensen, and I was, as we say here in Texas when we're playing Hold'em, all in. I finished that political science econ double major, but it was econ that I wanted to do. And once again, I chose University of Tennessee, by the way. Now, here's where the story takes an unfortunate turn, as graduate school economics was nowhere near as interesting as undergrad. See, the folks who taught almost all of my undergrad classes were institutionalists, followers of Thorstein Veblen, who had earned their PhDs at the University of Texas as opposed to the University of Tennessee. And they were fantastic, and that's what I thought economics was. Now all I was getting was all the neoclassical mainstream professors. Now don't get me wrong, some of them were quite good as classroom instructors, and they were helpful to me. But man, oh man, did the economics become much less interesting, and worse yet, much less relevant. Especially the macroeconomics, which was one of my two main interests. I got to thinking I'd made a huge mistake and I wasn't sure how to fix it. I don't know that I want a PhD in this anymore. What am I going to do? The only two classes I was really enjoying were Ann Mayhew's U.S. Economic History, which is a fantastic course, and Hans Jensen. Now I'm taking him again here at the graduate level. Actually, it's a 3-quarter sequence on the history of economic thought, and they, of course, were both University of Texas PhDs. But otherwise, I don't want to say the courses were uninteresting, but they were certainly not insightful or inspiring. So what the hell was I going to do? Enter fate. I walked down to my graduate school office one day and I found lying on my desk a book called A Guide to Post-Keynesian Economics, edited by a fellow named Alfred Eichner. I asked around, I said, whose book is this? And nobody claimed it. So, well, I guess I'll start reading it. Oh my God, this is what I was after. The introduction was all about how economics should be relevant to the real world, how it should reflect real-world institutions and history, etc. Here's the actual opening of the volume. These were the first words I ever read about post-Keynesianism from Alfred Eichner. Late in the day, after they have had 2 or 3 drinks, many economics professors will begin to admit to their own reservations about the theory which forms the core of the economics curriculum. The theory, they will acknowledge, is at odds with much of what is known about the behavior of economic institutions. But what else is there to teach our students, they will ask. This question, it turns out, can be readily answered, for there does exist an alternative to the neoclassical synthesis presented to students in introductory, intermediate, and advanced economics courses. That alternative is the post-Keynesian theory, which is the subject of this book. Well, now I knew what I was going to do with my life. I was going to finish up my PhD in neoclassical economics, and my dissertation was all neoclassical. It was an open economy, Barrow and Grossman disequilibrium model, very, very Keynesian. And I'll finish up that PhD, and then when I get done, I'm going to go off and just pursue post-Keynesian economics, having no idea, of course, that I would not be rewarded for that at the vast majority of institutions, but I got lucky. Now, at this point, It was Eichner that was my hero. Davidson had a chapter in the book, but it was on natural resources and not macro. So eventually, I got into Eichner stuff, including especially, it's a fantastic book here if you've never heard of it. Well, it's a fantastic book even if you have heard of it. The Megacorp and Oligopoly. All right? Micro Foundations of Macro Dynamics. Boy, I just tore through this. It was an alternate microeconomics, all right? And so that's what really caught my attention initially. Great stuff. Now, there were a number of us in the econ department, graduate students, that were interested in this post-Keynesian stuff, and we were very dissatisfied with what we were learning in the classroom. So we started, finding post-Keynesian papers and presenting them to each other. We'd take it in turns. And that's how I first learned about Davidson's economics. Now, as I said, I had two main interests, one of them being macro. The other one was international economics and especially financial markets. And Paul Davidson had written him a book called International Money and the Real World. Well, I was dying to read it. However, since it was a follow-up to Money and the Real World, I figured, I got to read Money and the Real World first. And in fact, I did. And let me show you something here. These are my notes from like 1970, 1980 something, late 80s. Making a little note card for myself in here to remember all the notations and stuff. I think the word nerd is particularly appropriate here. I didn't let my cowboy friends know I was doing this. But anyway, so I read the book. Now, I got a lot more to say about it here in a minute, so let me just skip over that right now. But it made a huge impact on me, all right? Now, then something else miraculous happened, all right? In 1986, while I was still in grad school there, I finished in 87, Tennessee actually hired Paul Davidson as their, I think it's called the Fred Holley Chair of Excellence. Well, I couldn't believe my luck. I mean, think about this. First of all, my dad got transferred to Knoxville from Nashville my sophomore year of high school. And because parents has got, not parents has got awful boring, they're actually quite interesting. Because physics has got awful boring, I got the hell out of that, went to the Foreign Service, took that class from Hans Jensen because I thought Foreign Service officers ought to know econ. And then before you knew it, I was an econ guy. Met this girl my senior year that made me stay 2 more years, or at least 2 more years at UT. Somebody left a copy of this damn book on my desk. And then I learned about that through Paul Davidson, and now the man himself was coming to UT. What a world we lived in, all right? I love these. I love these origin stories. I'll ask somebody like Pavlina Chernova or Randy Ray or Stephanie Kelton. So, how'd you learn about this economics? And it's always a series of chance events. It's very interesting because we don't get exposed to this in grad school. Hell, I was at a school that was full of institutionalists, and I didn't get exposed to institutionalism. So, it's an interesting story. Now, guess who the first speaker was that Davidson brought in? Alfred Eichner. I got to sit down with him. Nice man. I got to sit down with him. He passed away around 88 or 89, very young. But I had taken a bunch of notes like I had been doing with this other book here, with the Money in the Real World. Pardon me. And I sat down with him. He's going to sit down with some graduate students. He just pulled the list out of my hand. Just started going through the list, going through my questions. Nice man. Meanwhile, Davidson, of course, took over teaching macro. Now, I unfortunately had already completed that series, so I couldn't take that for credit. But a bunch of us older grad students did sit in on his very first day of class there. Hey, here's a useless piece of trivia. The first person to correctly answer a question in Paul Davidson's macro class at the University of Tennessee was none other than the cowboy economist himself. Davidson said something along the lines of, what was the single most revolutionary concept put forward by Keynes in the general theory? And everybody sat real quiet for a minute. And then I confidently belted out, uncertainty? And he said, yes! And that was actually very reaffirming. I said, well, at least I knew something about this economics, which, by the way, I knew from Dr. Jensen's History of Economic Thought class and not from macro. But knowing something about Keynes and post-Keynesianism wasn't very much. And because of that, I actually didn't interact very much with Dr. Davidson while he was at UT. I was frankly intimidated. What interesting thing could I possibly have to say to the Dean of American Post-Keynesian Economics? So we chatted in the hallway, and I talked quite a bit to his wife, Louise, a lovely woman. But that was about it. I finished up my dissertation, headed off to TCU, where I was hired into a department that was at the time full of institutionalists, which is why I was actually able to do the research I wanted to do. And then I started my re-education, all right? first and foremost on post-Keynesian economics and also institutionalism. Now, what was I reading at the time? All right, so maybe I'll try to make a list of this and put it underneath the video so you can see it. Money as Cause and Effect, 1973. Economic Journal. This was back when they'd let Dr. Davidson publish in mainstream journals. He and his mentor, Sidney Weintraub. Oh, it's a good article. Back in 73, talking about how just because statistically money supply changes may precede price changes doesn't mean there's causality. And you have to have a good theory, all right? You know, this crap from that Friedman fella about, well, it don't matter none how realistic the assumptions are as long as it predicts well. Boy, this was an assault directly on that. Because it said even if you have the statistical data that say money supply change and then price change, even if it does work out that way, and it doesn't have to, if you have the right theory, understanding how banking and capitalism really work, then you'll realize that the causation did not run that way. All right? Great article, great article. Another one that was really good was in the very first issue of the journal that he and Sidney Weintraub founded, Journal of Post-Keynesian Economics, Why Money Matters. Lessons from a half century of monetary theory, all about that Keynes fella. One of my favorites, really played into my research on exchange rates, Rational Expectations, a fallacious foundation for studying crucial decision-making processes, also in the JPKE 82 to 83. And he pointed out some stuff there that after you read it, you're like, well, yeah, my God, that seems so obvious now. Why did they teach me that other crap in class? Great article. All about how rational expectations makes the assumption that agents are not actually impacting that which they are predicting, when in fact, in economics, they are often creating the output. You got to read that one. Another one on Keynes, Reviving Keynes's Revolution. That was a good one. You MMT people might enjoy this one. The conventional wisdom on deficits is wrong. It was in Challenge in 1984. It's not all out MMT, but there's a lot in there you would like, right? And another one, Sensible Expectations and the Long-Run Non-Neutrality of Money. And something I liked about that was, hey, you know, everybody told rational expectations. And of course, that term had been hijacked already had a meaning, so he said, I'm going to call it sensible expectations. How would sensible expectations work? And that's what he pursues in that article in 87. So these were all key to building my understanding of how the economy really worked. I was reading other people too, of course, but it was Davidson stuff that was really the core of my macro and eventually of my exchange rate research. My first ever publication was in Davidson's journal, in the JPKE. And I got to tell you, I used to sit in my graduate school office looking at a copy of the JPKE, dreaming of being there one day. And this was a real thrill to get something accepted by a fella that I admired so much. All right? In fact, my second, third, fifth, sixth, seventh, 8th, 9th, and 10th publications at the JPKE were all on exchange rates and all derived from work that Keynes had done, that Davidson had done, and actually from psychology literature as well. So this was my main area. And important to me over this period were the following articles by Davidson: Reforming the World's Money, 92 to 93 JPKE. Volatile Financial Markets and the Speculator. That was one of my favorites of him, and it was in some journal called Economic Issues that I've never really heard of before or since, but it was a very good piece on speculation in financial markets. Efficiency and Fragile Speculative Financial Markets Against the Tobin Tax and for a Credible Market Maker. American Journal of Economics and Sociology. That's a real good one there where he talks about, I don't know if you've heard about this, a neoclassical suggestion about how to control the volatility of currency markets is to introduce a tax. Well, what Davidson points out there is that tax had to be so high. Because the volatility is so high, we have to charge people 50% tax on every transaction. I mean, that's not the way to solve the problem. That's going to be grains of sand when you need a boulder. And then, here's a good one too. Crude oil prices, market fundamentals or speculation. It was in Challenge again in 2008. An excellent piece that I think got overlooked, all about how the fluctuating oil prices at the time, and I think today as well, are being driven by speculation as a consequence of Bill Clinton signing into law, what's that thing called? The Commodity Futures Modernization Act or something like that. Really, really good piece. So as I became more confident in my economics, I began to reach out to Davidson a little bit more not just through his journal, but also as a colleague. And this really happened once I moved from doing exchange rate work to doing macroeconomics and business cycles. And particularly important here, and this is going to bring us back to this book right here, particularly important here is a decision I made in terms of teaching intermediate macroeconomics. It was 2012, and I hadn't taught the class in a long time. I used to do all different schools of thought. I said, well, let's do, this is intermediate macro, so it's the first macro class that, someone who's decided to be a major is going to take. And I would do like, here's classical economics, here's neoclassical economics, here's monetarist economics, and in the end, here's post-Keynesian. Well, this time around, there was just going to be one school of thought I was going to cover. And it's just going to be post-Keynesian, and that was it, all right? Now, what text to use? Well, I looked around, and what I had been doing before was having people take excerpts out of the general theory, right? But I found this. Paul Davidson, Post-Keynesian Macro Theory, second edition, all right? I adopted it without reading it. I said, this got to be the best thing out there. Then I finally sat down and started building the lectures, and I thought, oh my God, what have you done? I don't understand this graph he has on capital markets. Let me show it to you real quick. Where are you here, Paul Davidson? Labor. I should have been prepared for this, but I was not. I all of a sudden thought I'd show it to you. Must be over here. Money, liquidity preference. Oh, it's much earlier in the book than I thought it was. All right, here you go. This thing right here. That's the market for physical capital, all right? And I thought, what in the hell are you talking about? Now, here's it. And I thought, how am I going to back out of this? I've already got this set up for this class. I've made a big mistake. Well, you're right. You did make a big mistake because you're stupid. That's just the same damn thing you did in here, except you hadn't read it for 25 years. Turns out, once I sat down and worked it all out, it is absolutely brilliant. It is the most fantastic way of demonstrating with a static tool, general equilibrium analysis, a dynamic process. All right? It's fantastic. In fact, I ended up being so enamored of this particular analytical tool that I ended up writing a couple of pieces for the JPKE on it. If only every econ student were taught this, oh my God, what a different world it would be. So here I was, 25 years after earning my PhD, a little more than 25 after learning about this guy named Paul Davidson. I was still learning from him. It's also at this point I got over my feeling of being too intimidated by his reputation to reach out to him other than to say, hey, I'm submitting another paper to JPKE. Oh, I was still intimidated, but I wasn't too intimidated, all right? And I got to looking back over my emails as I was writing up this little memorial. And it was right in 2012 when I started asking about things, and the first thing I said to him was, subject I broached was about that graph. I said, I'm writing a paper on it right now, and I said, are you the one that invented that? I want to make sure I'm not missing something. And he said, his initial response was, what graph? And I said, oh yeah, sorry. So then I went back and said, on page so-and-so of Money in the Real World. He said, oh yeah, that's mine. And so I said, did you have it in an article before that? He said, nope, that's the first place. So went back and forth. And then he started including me on some emails that he would send out to people, hey, here's the latest article I wrote and so forth. And he had no idea, I'm quite sure, the joy that gave me to be included on these things after this guy made such a difference in my life, his economics, and brought me out of this wilderness that was neoclassicism. Well, I'm moving on. He was also kind enough to offer letters of support for me when I was up for a research award and when I was competing for a chaired professorship in my department. I got both. Absolutely thanks to the fact that the leading American post-Keynesian scholar of our age had made a case for me. It was an absolute honor and a dream come true. As someone who saw Davidson as one of the lights that led me out of the darkness and depression of my graduate school economics. Now, I have a book on business cycles right now out under review at several publishers, and I stated early on that it's based on the economics of John Maynard Keynes, Wesley Clare Mitchell, Michael Koleski, Hyman Minsky, and Paul Davidson. And I wish he was around to see it in print. One thing I don't regret, though, is I did not leave unsaid how much his work meant to me. I told him in 2015, for example, that as for myself, the more I study economics, the more I fall in line with your views. I am a firm believer in the Davidson branch of American post-Keynesianism, and that is a fact. Last time I saw Paul in person was January 2013 in San Diego at the Association for Evolutionary Economics conference. And I'm glad I got some pictures of that. And the last communication we had was March 7th of 2023 when I let him know that I got that chair professorship for which he had recommended me. His 3-word response and the last message he ever sent directly to me was a very kind, congratulations, well deserved. I hope so. But at any rate, it's a wonderful way to remember a man who meant so much to me. Someone I was scared to death to talk to for a quarter century, and who is now a cherished part of my experience, my memories. I can only hope that one day somebody looks back and say, I sure did like having John Harvey for class. He made me think of something I hadn't thought of before. And that's what we all aspire to. So, Paul Davidson, rest in peace.